Welcome to this week's episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm. This week, we sit down with Mount Union head coach Geoff Dartt. In this conversation, Coach Dartt discusses experiencing success as a player and a coach, navigating health issues in his career, and becoming the head coach at his alma mater. But first, a word from CoachComm.
Deuce left, check with me. If they're in quarters match, we're going to Pittsburgh or Ohio.
They're in zero.
Let's go Hippo, Seattle, wide choice. If we call the protection right, it's 6.
When a play call is the difference between winning and losing, your headset choice could be your most important decision. When the call counts, CoachComm is the only choice for clear, dependable communication. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
We got it, guys. Good job.
Now, let's get inside the headset with Coach Dartt.
Coach Dartt, what's going on, man? How you been?
Been good. Appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, no doubt, man. It's kind of good catching up with you. I know we used to be pretty connected a few years ago, and then you get that head job and became super busy.
Yeah, it's a lot of emails. A lot of emails.
That's right.
I've had a couple buddies that have since become head coaches at all different levels, but
right.
Yeah, they want to email you and ruin your day. No, I'm just kidding about the ruining part. But yeah, so there's a lot of administrative things that you need to take care of, which I understand. But no, it's good to hop on a call like this and talk a little bit.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Well, let's go ahead and dive in here. Typically start off the podcast with the same question. When did you know you want to be a ball coach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously I was fortunate enough to play here at Mount Union. Had some really great experiences with my coaches, and basically it was then I absolutely felt my development at the offensive line position, and I wanted to provide that for other student athletes. So that was kind of my trigger in terms of wanting to get into coaching, based on my experiences here that my coaches gave to me.
Absolutely. And, I kind of love that question. Oftentimes people give that answer, and you look at your playing career, you're not mentioning winning or the national championships or anything. It's just that experience that you had with those guys. Now, I do want to tap into the experience of like just playing at a storied program like Mount Union. Some of us be fortunate to win just a conference title, but to be a 3-time national championship and and a stint as a player has to be super special. Just what kind of what kind of takeaways do you have from that when you have that type of success in college and then you enter the profession as a coach?
Yeah, Mount Union is a extremely special place, obviously from a coach's standpoint and a player's standpoint, but it was always about being consistent each and every day. And what I appreciated the most about the coaches during my playing days is they didn't let you not be consistent. They were constantly on you from, you have to grind out good days. You have to be intentional about what you're doing in every situation, obviously starting with academics, but then attacking the practice field during the season or the weight room in the off season. And what I took with that is more so the mindset about myself and some of my teammates. We took it as like, that's how we were going to handle ourselves as individuals too. Yeah. We were going to be serious about what we were doing and how we were going about doing it. And maybe in some situations it got maybe misinterpreted of us being, maybe a little bit too intense at sometimes.
Right.
But, it was just every single day it was, how are you going to get better? And that's absolutely what we are still pushing here.
Yeah.
On our guys.
Well, you kind of look at your playing career, you're a 3-year letter winner, 3-time national championship, and then you look at where you are now. I think a lot of people's first guess would be your first gig was actually there at Mount Union, but you get away for a couple years. You take an opportunity over there at Wheaton College where you coached offensive line, offensive tackles for a couple years, and tight ends for a couple years. how I guess it's super interesting because it almost seems like you took over a room immediately, like because I know at the smaller schools you're running the room and you're doing all the background stuff. How did that opportunity come about, and were you able to land a job so quickly?
Yeah. So to preface that a little bit, I wasn't some great football player to begin. I guess this would more so answer the first question, but the coaches here were so good in investing in relationships, but also like the development aspect of it. And that's really where I fell in love with the whole coaching aspect. Eventually, I got pretty good and was able to become a starter, but surrounded by some really good teammates. And that's obviously why we had the success in terms of the national championships. So after I graduated from here, I absolutely wanted to get into coaching. At the time here at Mount Union, we had interns. They were called the coaching internship positions. They weren't grad assistant positions actually like they are now. So I had a conversation with Coach Larry Karras, who was my head coach at the time.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to get into it. A couple of the younger coaches helped me put together a resume.
Yeah.
And I blasted it out. And one of the responses was from actually Tim Hardy, was the offensive coordinator at Wheaton at the time. And Mount Union had played Wheaton in the playoffs for kind of a number of years there in the mid 2000s. So got connected with Coach Swider, went out there for an interview, and was fortunate enough to get that opportunity, which for me, looking back at it, like I liked going away from Mount Union, being in a different environment, learning football from coaches that were successful there. So it was really good for my development, maturity as a coach, not, automatically like trying to coach my friends here at Mount Union, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. Honestly, a lot of times, whenever I do get the guys that played at a place and then immediately GA or have their first that first gig there at the same place, that's a question I always ask: is how do you create that line of delineation? Guys you were just partying with a couple weeks ago, now all of a sudden you're trying to get them to hit a double team. And that was the interesting thing at Wheaton. I came in as I just graduated. Right. I was obviously the youngest coach on staff, and I was kind of like an incoming freshman a little bit there. So, and built some great relationships. Yeah, but you know what? Let me ask you that question regardless, right? Obviously it's not the same place, but yeah, you walk in and you have a position group, and there's probably some dudes in that room that were the same age as you, which I know age doesn't matter, but obviously there's something that you have to do to create a little bit of that barrier between like, hey man, we're both 23, probably both listen to the same music and all this kind of stuff, but I'm your ball coach. Like, what was your approach in regards to that?
Yeah. I was fortunate enough. I started off as tight ends and then kind of helped with the tackles a little bit. The offensive line coach there, Walt Whitehead, at the time was great for me, just getting me caught up what they were doing in terms of the run game. And then the offensive coordinator, Tim Hardy at the time, was, hey, I know you might not know how to run all these routes, but we're going to keep things simple. So now I had the benefit of being a Mount Union alum, so I think I had some street cred.
Yeah, for sure.
Going into it. So I got that from some of the guys at Wheaton, but they loved football. They loved to be coached. There was never really anything where this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Right. At least I didn't feel that. They were invested in, they wanted to be developed as well.
Yeah. Well, especially in these early jobs, this has been like probably a popular topic, talking with a lot of guys about those first couple of years. You are stepping outside, slightly out of your comfort zone. Obviously, the blocking is probably a lot of similarities within blocking as a tight end, but still differences. And then you got this pass game. You're actually thinking about what's going on downfield, the coverages, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
How what did you do as a young coach to make sure that they respect you had the street cred as a player, but when they walked in that meeting and said, hey, coach, I got this dig route and this backer walling me off. What do I do? How do you make sure you can coach them on something you've never done at that point in time?
Yeah, it was more about, and I remember having that conversation because the returning starter there was, I think he had some sort of all conference accolade from the year before, and we had a pretty good group. And I said, hey guys, I've never ran a route before or anything like that, but we're going to do it together.
Yeah.
And I think they really appreciated that.
Right.
And I said, we're going to learn together, and obviously interacting and having communication with the offensive coordinator consistently about how do you want me to coach this up per your past game, just so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
That's how I attack that. Yeah.
For sure. Well, you were named offensive coordinator relatively quick. We're not necessarily at that part. We're going to kind of keep it chronological, but like you were OC relatively quick in terms of, your typical time that you put in the game. How was there anything special about getting away from that offensive line, at least for that little bit of time, to help you develop as a coach and maybe help you prepare a little bit to be an OC?
Yeah, for sure. So the first offensive coordinator I worked with at Wheaton was Tim Hardy, and then he took a high school job down in Georgia. That's where his wife and her family was from. But then it was Joe Davis came in, which he's the new head coach at Western Illinois. And I had a great relationship with him. He actually had me draw the scout cards.
Okay. And
that is where I started to understand defense, structure, coverages, and all of that. And then I was a film junkie. I wanted to watch it all the time, understand it, constantly asking questions. And that's what I push on our young coaches here now is like, hey, like we all got to be on the same page with one another. So asking questions and watching videotape together and maybe disagreeing and then agreeing and having those discussions, I think is critical for the development of individual coaches and the staff in general.
Yeah. Well, after the stint there at Wheaton College, you return back to Mount Union as the offensive line coach. Now, I typically do a lot of homework before these podcasts, and I did not do a lot of homework here. I had Larry Karras on years ago on the same podcast here, and it was a blast. But one thing I didn't look at was are the staffs, both when you were an assistant and also now as a head coach, are they typically do you typically see a lot of Mount Union alum on the staff? Is that pretty common?
Yes. Yeah. Right now we have seven Mount Union alum out of our staff in terms of like the 10 people that are here on a daily basis. That includes GAs and all of that. So, but yeah, so my first year back here was in 2012 was Larry Karras' last year.
Yeah.
And that was on Mount Union had just lost 3 straight Stag Bowls national championship games to Wisconsin Whitewater.
Oh, okay.
And we were kind of in the midst of changing quarterbacks. And so, Larry Karras, this is what makes him great is like it's the constant questions and just, he wants to hear coaches talk, right? And then it's not they give the right answer or the wrong answer. It's just like he wants to give them a voice. So he was asking me, he's like, well, we got this quarterback and, what do you think we should do? And at the time I had just forget how I got it, but I just had a bunch of tape in terms of Chip Kelly's offense at Oregon. And that was kind of the, characteristics that this quarterback had. I said, well, let's watch this tape. Right. So we had, I think, maybe 6 or 7 games from the season. And then he called one of his really good coaching friends that I've become really close with, Tom Lombardo, who's the head coach at St. Edward's High School up in Lakewood, Ohio, which is a dynamic. There's
legendary. Yeah.
3 in a row.
Right. State
championship. So we break down this offense together, put it in our own terms, and we ended up being, 15-0 and the national champs. And I think that led to me coaching the O-line. And then when his son Vince took over, I think it was kind of maybe it just made sense that I'm not saying was ready to be the offensive coordinator. I absolutely wasn't.
Yeah.
But maybe that was probably the transition.
Yeah. Let me ask you this question here. So obviously I like doing this chronologically a little bit, but now that you're a lot more seasoned than you were at this point in time in your career. But, at this point, you've won 4 national championships in college, all 4 Mount Union. But, you've been in the profession for, at that point in time, 4 or 5 years, and you've won a national championship. You won 3 in college. Put yourself in that time. Did you recognize how hard that is? You know what I'm saying? Did you appreciate those moments, or was it just like, okay, this is what we do?
Yeah, the standard and expectations here at Mount Union are high.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, during my time at Wheaton, we were 36-10, which
still
over a 4-year career,
yeah.
anyone would say that's really good. We made it to the playoffs twice, and it was really good. But I always had the itch. I wanted to coach at Mount Union, just because I appreciated how I was coached. I wanted to do that with guys here. And then obviously the standard and the expectations, it's always high here.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to coach anywhere else in terms of that. But no, absolutely. I realized this is awesome.
It's special. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just curious. I obviously never had that type of success, but I just, you look at Nick Saban's run or Tom Brady and Michael Jordan and his time, and you just wonder, do you have the time to recognize how special that is, or is it just just another? Oh yeah, this is what we do. So that's good. You're able to kind of provide that perspective, and so you won the national championship. You actually kind of bring the idea to bring this offense in. So thusly, you get.
I suggested, obviously.
Yeah. I understand. Yeah.
You could, but it did change it.
Yeah.
A little bit just in terms of what we were doing.
Right.
Obviously, it made sense for the personnel, and
right.
I'm sure when you had Coach Karras on your podcast many years ago, he used the words players, formations, plays, and that was absolutely why I suggested it.
Yeah.
Quarterback is the guy that stirs the drink, and then how are we going to set up our offensive line to do what they can do effectively, and then we work the pass game off of that.
Right. So. Well, you somewhat made a joke a little bit as it made sense that you were promoted to, or kind of moved up into that offensive coordinator role, and you said, I don't know if I was ready for it. Talk about, especially in hindsight now. I know in the midst of things, sometimes it's hard to be a little bit more honest, but now you can look back after years of OCing and now being head coach, what were some of the hardships, some of the challenges as a first year offensive coordinator, especially at a story program like that?
Yeah. Scripting during practice.
Yeah.
That was because I was named it essentially in May, right? So going into the season, I just wasn't ready. Fortunately, we hired one of my really good friends that was a teammate of mine, Chris Kappas. He was a GA at Bowling Green.
Mm-hmm.
Chris played safety here at Mount Union, but he was a defensive GA at Bowling Green. And when he came back, he was a receivers coach. So we kind of worked together just in terms of I asked him, how did you guys game plan for an offense? And then we talked about how we game planned from 2012, right? Larry Karras' last year. And we were able to put together our own game plan together. We're kind of co-offensive coordinators, to be perfectly honest with you. And then here's a great story. I remember so I get married in the summer of 2014, and I wrote letters to all my groomsmen that were in it. And I thank Chris for being my right-handed guy during that 2013 season. And we kind of grew up together. His first time on offense, my first time being a coordinator, which I think that's some of the special things that happen when, you have Mount Union people coaching Mount Union football.
Yeah, man, that's. I had Kappas on the podcast. Within the last year, he was a 35 guy. Awesome guy. I know he took a head job.
Oh, he's great.
Down in Tennessee at a high school, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's Tennessee. And yeah, but I don't think we talked about him being on offense. I thought he was always a D guy.
Well, so he was at Bowling Green, like I said. Then he came here.
Yeah.
And in 13, Vince was still calling the defense.
Oh, okay.
So the only true opening was on the offensive side.
That's right.
Yeah. So, because I remember we're going into week 1, I was like, how did you guys third down game plan? And he's like, well, we did it like this. I was like, all right, that makes sense. Let's just do it that way.
Yeah.
From kind of flipped it.
Right.
And then, like I said, we had a lot of success. The quarterback, Kevin Burke, at the time was now in his second year starting. We'd replaced a lot of people from that 2012 team. And, we were able to make it to the national championship game, but we weren't a great football team yet. Not a program. The program was good, but so we had a lot of development. And then in 2014, he was named defensive coordinator, and then DK kind of just took the more head coaching approach at that standpoint, focused on special teams.
Yeah.
And we had another successful year, but came up short in the national championship game against Whitewater.
Yeah.
So, there was that time from 2005 through 2014 that we played them every year in the national championship game. Yeah. It's kind of crazy to think about.
That is insane to think about, man. You just talking, like you kind of know the light at the end of the tunnel, but you still got to handle business, and that's probably the more interesting thing is that the consistency that you got to be able to have to consistently get yourself there to play that game, and whichever way it went was always unique. So, over your time as an offensive coordinator, that first go at Mount Union, 4-time conference championships, national championship in 2015. What was, just hindsight, what was the biggest growth from that year 1 OC to that year 4 OC prior to you leaving to Western Kentucky?
Yeah, it was definitely getting more comfortable and having a better understanding about situational football.
Yeah.
Red zone, third down situations, end of game situations, or end of half, end of game situations. Are you up? Are you down? How are you going to attack in those things? And sometimes, you don't necessarily always think about those things, but they are critically important. And then there's always those 10 to 12 plays a game that are the difference.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially during that, 13 and 14, we were 14-1 both of those years. So what did we not do well in that last game that we weren't able to achieve what we wanted to achieve?
Right. Well, after a long line of a bunch of Mount Union, a little bit of Wheaton College, a bunch of W's at both spots, you kind of take a leap to the FBS level where you become the offensive line at Western Kentucky. What went into you getting away from Mount Union for that little bit of time, and then would allow for that process, that job opportunity to even show up at your door?
Yeah. The first thing for me is I'm probably too obsessed with coaching the offensive line. Like I absolutely love it.
Yeah.
I love researching it. I've been going through the Cool Clinic tapes already this year. I wasn't able to be on them live or anything like that, but I wanted to coach the offensive line at the highest level possible. So that was actually a Wheaton connection. A guy that I had a good relationship with as a player, Matt Mitchell, his brother-in-law was Mike Sanford Jr. So Mike ended up getting the job at Western Kentucky, and we got connected through Matt. And so I actually drove over to South Bend for the interview with Mike because he was previously the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. So that's how I got into that connection there. And like I said before, my goal was to coach the offensive line at the highest possible level, and that afforded me my opportunity. So my wife was due in February and I left in January. So maybe that wasn't the best decision, but, the wives are the best because they allow us to do what we want to do.
Yeah. And then, you get the opportunity there at Western Kentucky, and you're at the FBS level. Was there what was the difference? Was football, or did you find any differences of switching those levels up like that?
Absolutely, football's football. I was surrounded by some great coaches there too that I was able to develop some relationships with. Obviously, you don't see it too many times, like going from D3 to the FBS level, especially as a position coach. But I was fortunate for my opportunity, and I was prepared to work. I think obviously you always have to adjust for what the recruiting standards are and all of that. But I love recruiting. I love grinding in the office and all of that. Probably the biggest thing was when they said, well, you like have July off. I'm like, what? Like I'm a D3 guy. Like I was like
scrambling to get those guys in.
yeah. Not that it was a bad thing. Like I wasn't trying to.
Yeah. No doubt about that. That was I spent a little time at the D3 level and at the FBS level, and it is a huge difference in terms of like, in January for Division III, and this might have changed, so don't let me speak incorrectly, but I know at the time I was there, like January, you were recruiting guys, but it wasn't, it was a lot more important, kind of almost after signing day. It got more ramped up as you got closer to those guys graduating versus, once February hit, back then, I know once again the transfer portal has changed a lot of things, but you kind of wiped your hands clean, at least for a little bit. It's just a much different model for sure.
Yeah, and it was more so, I loved it. Like I was like just writing down notes, listening, not talking. I almost like wanted to treat myself like I was a GA, just in terms of learning like the whole mechanism of what that looks like recruiting at that level. Obviously the rules and the regulations and everything like that. But I loved it. I learned a lot, and was, very, very fortunate that I was afforded that opportunity.
Yeah, no doubt, man. And obviously it kind of had a difficult time that came up for yourself. You feel free to dive into it as much or as little as you like to. Yeah. But I kind of let you take over from that point.
Yeah. So unfortunately, had some medical things pop up. Long story short, the trainer there eventually, he was just like, hey, we're going to go over and we're going to get, MRI, CAT scan, all that. And they found a brain tumor. Now, everything happens for a reason. We're close to Nashville, Tennessee, where Vanderbilt is at. What I ended up being diagnosed with was the brain surgeon was in town that day. I was able to get brain surgery, remove the tumor. It was cancerous, but I was in a position where Coach Sanford and the staff really took care of myself and my family, which is greatly appreciated. Was able to get the treatment initially down in Nashville, and then, obviously, if you want to be a college football coach, you got to be around.
Yeah.
So, and I know it was a difficult decision, everything going on, but Mike Sanford Jr. absolutely made the right decision, hiring another offensive line coach. And then they were going to keep me on, but I just thought it best, like, go back home where my family was at, get the proper treatment I needed.
Yeah.
And so that brought me back to Mount Union. But I can't say enough great things about Mike Sanford Jr. and the coaching staff at Western Kentucky that rallied around myself and my family during that thing.
Yeah, I definitely remember that time and the support from them. And obviously, I'm not behind the scenes, but I'm it's a ton that probably goes on in a situation like that. The crazy thing about that was you weren't off the field for very long. I mean, you were back at Mount Union coaching in 18. Were you coaching like normal, or was there any big adjustments?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I was here every single day. I was the tight ends coach, and then I was helping out in special teams.
Right.
with Vince Garris. So I was only, gone, I think, maybe 16 months, 17 months, something like that. So I was still, at that point, Chris Kappas went from defensive coordinator to offensive coordinator. So the offense didn't change drastically or anything like that. We were still doing some of the similar things, but obviously the comfort level of coming back to Mount Union, I knew how to operate here and all of that, was really, really good.
And so shortly after that, I guess Kappas left, or I could have that incorrect, but you ended up being an OC again in 2019. That's correct, right? Yeah.
So after the 2018 season, we pivoted back to kind of like we were before. So Kappas moved back to defensive coordinator. I moved back to offensive O-line coordinator at that position, and that was Vince Garris's last year.
Yeah.
At that point, before he moved down to Toledo to become the defensive coordinator there.
And so, I can't even imagine how you look at that time frame. That probably 3-year period between 17 and 19. But what was that comfort level of just getting back in that offensive coordinator chair, the place that you play ball and have done this before? Was it kind of a sigh of relief and just happy to be back there? What was your mindset at that point?
Yeah, we were coming off of a Stag Bowl loss that year in 2018, and obviously we made the switch early in the 2019 offseason. So there was, all right, what's the best way to go about doing this? I'm a big believer, they won the Stag Bowl in 2017 when I was at Western Kentucky, and then 14-1 with the Stag Bowl loss. I'm one person. I'm not going to change the offense based on 60 guys having to adjust in terms of what I want to change. So I just wanted to adjust maybe some of the things that I wanted to do and concentrate on a little bit more. We had a senior quarterback that was extremely talented. We had a very, very good offensive line. So, I wanted to play off them a little bit. So I just implemented some little things, not a wholesale change, because that's not fair to the players in that situation.
Yeah. And so was there a lot of, when you got back in 18, was there a lot of learning at all? I'm sure it was still a lot of the same stuff, but was there some things that had changed enough for you to be like, hey, what's this? What are we calling that?
A little bit.
Okay.
And Chris did the same thing that I did. Right. He didn't change everything. Yeah. Right. He did kind of, which, that's a good thing. Like he basically built the offense based on what people attack the defense with, which is, kind of like and I've heard other coaches have done like the whole flip, like you make offensive coaches coach defensive positions and all that. So, which me and him were always communicating with one another, obviously when we were on the staff together in 2013, but even throughout 14, 15, and 16, when he was the coordinator on defense and I was the coordinator on offense, we were always like, well, hey, Geoff, do you like this blitz and coverage? How would you attack it? And then it was vice versa. Me and him, I was communicating, hey, what do you think about this run game, or how we're blocking this blitz and all of that? So, and we both got married on the chapel on campus, and we were in each other's wedding. So,
that's your the brother from another mother, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
The more you talk about it, because I know I said earlier, I didn't remember. I thought he was a D only guy. Like, we had a whole segment about him going back and forth and just everything he was able to gain from. Just the more you talk, the more it refreshes my memory there. Now, did y'all play together? Was he a player with you at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay. So y'all played together.
We were teammates. Yeah, we were teammates too.
Yeah.
So,
that's crazy, man. Now, I just said the phrase, I'm sure 2017 to 19 was a whirlwind, but 2020 was a whirlwind for everybody, right? I can go ahead and extend that out. So I'm sure 2017 to 2020 was a whirlwind, because in 2020 you get the opportunity to become the head ball coach there, and then obviously you had all the COVID situations. I don't know exactly what happened with you guys there in regards to how you handled that, playing and having a season or half season or whatnot. But just talk about that transition and then really just lead it into that year.
Yeah. So I became head coach at the end of January, and which a month later, our guys were on spring break. So we were in the weight room. So it was kind of business as usual, in terms of recruiting and all of that. Obviously, I had to transition more to the way we always did recruiting here was the head coach met with every single individual recruit on campus. So that was easy for me to talk about Mount Union football, identifying, the recruiting skills that we look for and all of that. But then, obviously COVID hits. The guys are coming back from spring break. The students are coming back from spring break. And then we need to get into, the virtual learning. So we came up with the idea that I would meet with each position group once a week for like 10 minutes on Teams, which, there was a lot of frustrating things there because you can't build relationships like that through a screen. It's just pretty much communication. And if I was a player, I would have hated it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Oh, I got to get on Teams call today with Coach Dartt and listen to him talk about things that we can't control because we're not on campus or anything like that. So, and then it didn't really come out until the later part of the summer where it got the fall season got shut down. Yeah. So there were many things like you mentioned that were happening at that point, which kind of frustrated everybody. Right. And so we did some practices in the fall, but there was just we decided to cancel them just because there was nothing really to look forward to in terms of playing games or anything like that. So then the spring season got approved. So now as we move into 21, January, we start to plan like our practices at the end of January going into February, and we're ready for the 5-game schedule that we were going to play, which you started to feel the energy and momentum in the players. Like they had something to look forward to. And I couldn't even imagine that as a player, as a young person going through that, having to adjust their academic life and then having to adjust their athletic life. And obviously it was out of their control. So, but we had a really successful spring season. We only ended up playing 4 games when we were scheduled for 5, but we were 4-0. And I thought that built a lot of momentum going into the 21 fall.
Yeah.
So,
well, a couple questions off that for you. How seemingly you just rolled into being an OC to head coach. You had to be ecstatic. I mean, obviously the situation in terms of what followed after the end of January, obviously that wasn't ideal. But I mean, this is a place I won 3 national championships at. I climbed the ranks as an assistant coach to OC. Won national championships at both a position coach and as offensive coordinator. I mean, you get that news. Are you smiling ear for ear, or are you just like, man, this is business as usual? Yeah.
Well. Smiling ear to ear. I was excited, but it was
don't look
like I truly, I never wanted to be a head coach.
Really?
Like I loved being the offensive line coach. I did enjoy being the offensive coordinator. So there was it was kind of like that oh shoot moment where okay, what do I do next? And then we have our first staff meeting and. All right, guys, what do you want to talk about? Like I didn't know how to do any of that.
Let me ask that question just real quick and continue on. What is it like that it's a group of guys that, I mean, I would assume it probably wasn't that much transition amongst the staff.
No.
What is it like just to move over four chairs, 2 chairs, 1 chair, and you start the meeting and all eyes are on you? Like that for the first time. Yeah.
Weird, strange. My office, this is before we had a different building built on campus, but my office was next to DK's office. So every morning I would just walk in and, I moved 2 seats actually for
2 seats.
like the setup of that, but it was different. And there were some things that I'm one of those guys, like, I'm not going to try to like make up something that I don't know.
Yeah.
So we had a great staff and I communicated with them. Hey, I don't have all the answers. I'm going to grow in this role. You're going to grow in your role. We're going to grow in this together. And per your point, I was fortunate to be surrounded by, Mount Union people.
Yeah.
Right. And, 3 of them were my teammates when I played here. So that was easy, and that trust and loyalty was already there.
Yeah. And the second part of that question I have for you off your response just in that first year was, you had an issue. Let's say 2020, the COVID pandemic thing didn't exist. If you had an issue or you had a question or one of those true moments where you just really don't know, you probably can pick the phone up and call Vince, or you call Larry, or something like that, and get some type of answer.
Exactly.
But then all of a sudden you're in this situation where neither one of them have ever been into that. Heck, I don't know. I've never been in a pandemic. So what?
Well, and here's the story with that. So our guys are on spring break, right? So Larry Karras at the time he's still the athletic director.
Yeah.
That he was the athletic director from '86 until 2021, 2022, something like that. So he called me one day, and our men's basketball team was on a really successful run. They were in the playoffs. We were a host site. I can't remember if it was the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, whatever it was. And he calls me and he's like, "Hey, you got to move up spring ball." And I was like, "Okay, what do you mean I got to move up spring ball?" And then I said, "To when?" And he's like, "Let's do it." I forget the exact day, but then eventually it was like, "Well, let's just do it on Tuesday." I was like, "Tuesday? We got to install and everything like that?"
Yeah.
So this was either, I think it was Thursday, and then Friday we're talking about it. So I'm like, "Well, I'm going to walk over to the basketball game," and then like that's when the COVID, that's when the shutdown happened or whatever. But yeah, to your point, I didn't really have anyone to talk to about how we should handle things. When they went home, what were other coaches doing?
Yeah.
I would like to, Mike Sirianni, Nick's older brother, who all 3 Sirianni brothers played football here in Mount Union. He's the head coach at Washington and Jefferson. I bounced a lot of ideas off the 10, just in terms of, hey, what are they allowing you to do at W&J? And he was asking me questions too, maybe to like empower me or whatever. But he was a big help during that time.
Yeah.
Not that other coaches weren't, but
just kind of the guy you leaned on a little bit. I mean, from my conversations,
I don't think anyone had the answer.
Yeah, that's what it almost seemed like, was just kind of everybody was just calling everybody. So, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And one last follow up off of that, because I don't think I've ever asked this, to anybody, but I was always curious. Football is designed a certain way for a certain reason. You play 82 basketball games. You'd be crazy to play 82 football games, in regards to, at the professional level. Like, what did you see any negative impact of having those 4 games in the spring versus how quick that turnaround was to get back to fall camp and, get guys ready for a new season?
I wouldn't say negative. Okay. If anything, it was a positive because they were without football for so long. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. And they were hungry.
They were ready.
We got beat by a great North Central team in the 2019 season in the second round. They went on to be national champs. Mm-hmm. So there they wanted to get right back to it.
Yeah.
But that was, I think we played our last game here at Mount Union, maybe at some point in April or late March. I can't remember exactly. But yeah, it was a short turnaround for sure. And we were recruiting during that time, trying to handle that. So obviously we recruit during the season, but it's a whole lot different in the spring where you're just pretty much, that's your focus.
Right.
But we were able to bring in a really talented class, and that helped propel us into a fall season in 21 where we had a successful season, but we didn't achieve, what we wanted to achieve. And we got bumped out in the semifinals by North Central again there.
And as far as yourself goes in that situation, like this, you kind of had a little bit of a teaser season in the fall where you just had to make a bunch of decisions in terms of if you're going to practice or not, what you're going to do, how you're going to see your kids. Then you have this another teaser season in the spring of these 4 games, where you do get to be a head ball coach, but it's just, I'm going to imagine, a little bit different than it is your typical 12, 13, 14, 15 week for you guys, kind of a grind throughout the course of a season. Now you get to the true season after a little bit of a wait as a first-time head coach. Well, was there some learning curves there, or were you able to kind of mitigate a bunch of that stuff just with that little extra time?
There was always, learning curves. Like that was my first official
right
season.
Yeah.
Going into that. So obviously planning the fall camp, all of that, what we're doing, all right, the guys come back, how we're going to test them.
Yeah.
In the weight room, conditioning standpoint, all of that. Like, what is the daily plan in terms of setting that up? And obviously I leaned a lot in those situations. That was always a great thing that Larry Karras did and Vince Karras did, was they gave the assistant coaches, especially the full-time coaches, administrative duties.
Yeah.
So they could kind of always understand what goes into the Division III coaching world, and then putting us in some maybe more so leadership opportunities sometimes helps with the transition.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, you mentioned that first year you get bumped out. I believe you said the semifinals. You backdoor that with Conference Coach of the Year, 10-0 regular season, school's 22nd NCAA National Championship appearance. In 2023, 11-1 regular season, school's 34th NCAA playoff appearance. Just continue to kind of stack up on that. I guess kind of a final question before we talk about 35 and 35 is, you start talking about the amount of success that Mount Union has seen, that you've been a large part of, and you just think about how much times have changed in terms of, I just hit 40 years old, which is mind-boggling to me, but just think about how different college you think about how different college football was when we played, think about our interests, social media, obviously, at the higher levels, you got NIL, but I'm sure you guys still probably have some stuff that touches the NIL and the transfer portal and all that kind of stuff. How has Mount Union been able to maintain a culture throughout the major changes in athletes today and NCAA rules today? And how have you been able to, keep up with the culture of the kids?
Yeah, I would go back to the consistency part of that's what was instilled in us when we were players here. I'm the 4th head coach since 1962 here at Mount Union. So Ken Wapel was 62 to 85, and Larry Karras, 86 to through 2012, and then Vince Karras. So I'm not saying I'm smart, but I'm also not dumb. So we didn't want to change our recruiting model in terms of what we look for there, which I think is obviously the most important people in our program are our players.
Yeah.
If I had to go back on anything, it would be doing a better job of building better relationships with players, because, when the offensive coordinator becomes the head coach, he doesn't necessarily know all of the defensive players. Yeah. Not that I didn't know them or anything like that, but I think that could have helped. I don't want to use COVID as an excuse like that, but I think that could have helped set up the program a little bit better.
Yeah.
If I'm being perfectly honest.
Right.
That would probably be the biggest thing that I'm growing in as right now is just developing relationships with all the players on the team, giving them a voice, meeting with them. Like at the end of a spring season, I did exit meetings with every single player on the team. And when they walked in, I was like, okay, this is open forum. What do you want to talk about? Right? It doesn't need to be about football. It wants to be about football. What's on your mind? And I think that like helps, and it's going to help going into the fall season.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I said that was going to be my last question. I do want to ask this question. You know, you look at the run that you guys have had. We just got a new executive director here in Coach Craig Bowl, and you know he spent some time in North Dakota State. Yeah, you know you talk about these places that, man, they just have these long runs and just a long tradition. And one word that I typically hear from those guys when I talk to them is when they're talking about recruiting, they talk about this term that everybody says, fit. You know, is that guy fit? How have you guys been able to continuously find people that are going to come into that culture and respect consistency, respect tough coaching, you know, respect accountability, you know, that type of stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think the first aspect is we have former Mount Union football players recruiting new Mount Union football players. Yeah. So there's not some big recruiting meeting where I was like, hey, we need to be talking to these guys like this, right? They live it themselves. They know tell their own stories. Right. But when we bring in, you know, some coaches that maybe they didn't play football here, this is about keeping things simple. Like I'm a big, like, I believe simplicity accelerates fundamental development. So if you start off things simple in terms of our recruiting model, which we want to identify talent at the position. Okay, then we're going to tell them here, like, your number one goal is to get a degree. We're a Division III school. We're not giving you an athletic scholarship, right? So talent, getting the grades you're capable of getting that degree, right? And then making good decisions as a human being, right? Which no one's perfect. So we always talk about what goes into that. But then really the thing for us is maybe regardless of the talent, do you love football? Do you want to be coached? Do you want to be developed? And do you want to become the best version of yourself? Right? Because if we get guys that want it every single day and they want to get coached and developed, then we're going to be good. Like, I haven't won any games as a coach.
Right.
I believe I've lost 3. We've had 3 losses since I've become the head coach here. But everything's on our players. Like, in terms of they're the most important people, they're the ones that win games. So I just need to continue to grow and develop by getting them more so developed and having them prepared so they can go out and execute and do what they love to do.
Amen. Well, you kind of, I think you built some work for my GAs here for me that I got. We typically do a little project every single year where you just do some type of study on whatever I kind of get nerded out on. But as you were, you know, talking about these Mount Union guys, I'm just sitting here like, Mount Union's got to be up there with probably the most, you know, successful college NFL coaches. You know, it seems like a very, very coach-oriented program. Because there's a lot of guys I've had on the podcast that played at Mount Union. It's Youngstown State is kind of like that. Texas Tech is kind of like that. But yeah. Mount Union might have a lot of these guys beat when I really start looking at the numbers of coaches that are just all over the place, just doing some really good stuff at all levels. Yeah.
No, it's just I mean, Larry Carrot said.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the whole reason that Mount Union is on the map, what he built. Obviously, he had some great assistant coaches over the course of his time, but like he had the vision early, like talking about the history of Mount Union football. In 1985, Ken Wable's last year, they won the first undefeated regular season OAC championship. And then he took over in 86. And he had some loyal coaches that stuck around, and they got it going in the early 90s, and then they achieved that first one in 1993. And then obviously that created a lot of momentum in recruiting.
Yeah.
You're able to, when you win, you're able to generate interest.
That's right.
Obviously. It's not easy, but, I think the grind of recruiting at the Division III level is you have to have someone buy into the investment and the value of a place because they have to pay for it.
That's right.
Right. And that's actually what I loved about when I went to Western Kentucky. They're like, well, do you think you can adjust recruiting? I was like, yeah, I'm not managing like 150 recruits now. I'm got it like streamlined.
Yeah. Right.
And I can say, hey, we're going to offer you a full scholarship too.
I got something to give you here. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
But no, it's just, this is a great place. It's just the experiences that those guys had. They wanted to get into coaching. And yeah, I do believe, I'm not saying it's the new cradle of coaches, but Larry Karras's coaching tree, Vince Karras's coaching tree, it's elite.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, Coach, I'm happy about the opportunity to catch up with you, number one, and then number two, just be able to hear your story and just allow for coaches to maybe learn from some of the decisions that you made and see without the national championships. I don't know if anybody be that fortunate, but be able to kind of live vicariously through you to help them as they navigate this coaching profession. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Appreciate you, and everything that AFCA does for coaches, very much appreciated.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Coach. We'll be cheering you on as usual, and look forward to hopefully seeing you soon at the convention. All right.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right, brother.
CoachComm has been delivering tough headsets for tough teams for more than 31 years. It's why 97% of FBS teams and thousands of high schools across the country rely on CoachComm. Get the best for your team. Visit CoachComm.com for more info.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Inside the Headset, presented by CoachComm. If you'd like to learn more about this week's episode, head over to AFCA.com. There, you can access every episode and find corresponding show notes. Remember, you can catch every episode of Inside the Headset presented by CoachComm on wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. While you're there, we'd love for you to take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Your feedback helps us improve and grow. Keep up with the latest news by following us on social media. Connect with us at Inside the Headset, and remember to tag us when you share your favorite episodes. For more updates on all things AFCA, be sure to follow the @WeAreAFCA social media accounts. If you're not a part of the AFCA community yet, visit AFCA.com to join thousands of NFL, college, and high school coaches nationwide and across the globe. Elevate your coaching game with an AFCA membership. You'll gain exclusive access to the annual AFCA convention, magazine, digital library, and AFCA Insider email. Stay up to date with the latest stories and news on the AFCA website. More than just a convention, the AFCA offers continuous education, guidance, networking, and more. Celebrate the past and shape the future with the AFCA. It's about fostering exceptional coaches who create outstanding teams and even better individuals. Invest in your skills and make a lasting impact today by engaging with the AFCA. Your journey starts here.